Hi, I'm Brandon Dorr, Creativity and Media Innovation Reporter at AdAge. Welcome to another edition of the Marketer's Brief Podcast, our weekly discussion of news and trends that have the industry buzzing. Kayak recently launched Bookboards, a campaign that calls out flaky friends who tend to kill travel plans. By calling them out on billboards in specific cities, the travel website aims to curb this behavior and encourage people to follow through on booking trips. That campaign started from a particular insight uncovered through consumer research, showing that 84% of trips fall apart before they're ever booked. And 9 times out of 10, it's because one person failed to follow through. On the latest episode of the Marketer's Brief podcast, Kayak Senior VP of Global Brand Marketing, Carolina Montenegro, talks about how consumer research helps develop campaigns, how to tease consumers about their behaviors without being too mean, and how to get consumers to interact in campaigns. Here's that conversation now. Carolina Montenegro, welcome to the Marketer's Brief podcast.
Thank you for having me, Brandon. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you. Particular consumer insight helped form Bookboards, which we covered that campaign. Listeners should check out that coverage on our website. The insight was that 84% of travelers see a planned trip stall before booking, and 9 times out of 10, it's because of one friend who did not commit to the plans. Now, research played a big role in that campaign and also in developing the brand platform Got That Right, which was launched in February. Both campaigns launched with Rethink. We covered that campaign as well. Again, listeners should check that coverage out on our website so they know what campaigns we're talking about. Tell me a little bit about the research process for both campaigns, Kayak's research process generally, and how Kayak uses research for campaign development.
Yeah, and we use it in literally everything we do, right? So it always starts with some sort of trending topic or an idea that we've seen happening, right? So at Kayak, the good thing is we have sort of a unique window into that traveler behavior through the billions of, searches conducted on our platform each year. And that kind of gives us that real-time insight into, where travelers want to go, how they're planning, what's influencing their decisions. And then those signals help us sort of identify those potential consumer insights. And that's where that's sort of where we start. That's where the insights begin. And then we don't stop there, right? We validate them through the consumer research to ensure they're really grounded in those real behaviors and attitudes before they become a creative platform, right? So they start sort of as a hunch from the extensive data that we have of travelers on our site. And then they become a validated sort of research point to continue on with the insight to create our campaigns. And as you mentioned, for our recent Bookboards campaign, yes, our data pointed to the rise of group travel. But before that, we had sat multiple times in meeting rooms and saying, there is something in the group trip, there's something in the group chat, right? And then when Rethink came to us with this idea, we're like, all right, there's something here, let's validate it. And then we confirmed the friction behind it. So as you mentioned, 84% of travelers, they have a group trip stall in the group chat, often spending 1 to 3 months in planning limbo. And I'm not going to lie, this has happened to me before. I'm not the flaky friend in this case, but it has happened. And the biggest reason is 90% of those travelers have said it's because of that, again, flaky friend that just won't commit, right? And sort of that combination of behavioral data and the consumer validation gave us that confidence that we had the insight that people would immediately recognize, allowing us to build the campaign that felt both relevant and culturally true. The same thing we did for Big Trip Small Screen. We validated that with data as well before we went off and created the campaign itself.
I think I've been both the flaky friend and the other person, so I do empathize actually for all the flaky people who are listening to this. I empathize with your plight of not wanting to commit as well, but also being the other person as well. Can we talk? So you mentioned often that it starts with a hunch before you actually kind of dive full-fledged into research. Where does that hunch come from? I know it comes from the data. Do you guys have like a dedicated team that is sort of just like constantly scouring over data for these sorts of like nuggets? Where does the hunch kind of come from?
It usually comes throughout the year, right? So we start the year planning for what's going to be our tentpole events or our tentpole campaigns that we're going to focus on for the year, right? So we'll spend some time pre-planning and go scouring through the data and then coming up with these hunches. We also rely on Rethink a lot to help us come up with some of these ideas. But sometimes it's just culturally relevant things that might happen in a specific moment, right? So if something's happening, a trending topic right now, we'll try to jump into it pretty immediately. So we do the pre-planning, as much as possible so we have time to create things, but we also don't waste time. And if something's culturally relevant at the moment, we're going to try to tap into it.
I want to talk a little bit about like strategically why it makes sense to sort of start your campaign development with some of this research and fleshing out a consumer insight before starting to kind of develop some of the creative and the media and stuff. Can you just talk about like strategically what is the importance of that? And is there like a particular business challenge that you guys feel like it sort of helps solve by sort of starting with the research and the insight that comes from that research?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we connect with our consumers, right? We want that emotional connection. We want to be speaking to consumers in something that's relevant to them and that they understand and that they can kind of connect with, right? And so to us, that's the most important thing. That's why a lot of the time we lean into humor and into that lightly teasing travel search habits as we do our different campaigns because basically we feel, travel is supposed to be fun and Kayak, it's a fun brand. So at the end of the day, we have to be honest with ourselves that sometimes the planning process is not fun. It can be quite stressful. So, I always joke around that I love traveling, but I outsource most of the actual planning to my husband because he actually enjoys the planning part. And so I think that's exactly why we try to build these campaigns centered around these ideas, these emotional connections that kind of lean into humor and around these little truths, right? And so at Kayak, we look for those relatable moments every traveler has experienced, and then we use humor to make people feel seen rather than judged, right? And whether it's the friend who never commits to the group trip in Bookboards or planning a big international trip on a tiny phone screen, we're kind of lightly poking fun at those universal travel habits. And ultimately, our goal is to take the stress out of travel planning, right? If we can make people smile because they recognize themselves in a specific story, and remind them that Kayak can help make the process easier, then at the end of the day, we've done our job.
How are like advancements in tech maybe changing the way that Kayak does consumer research and like lands on consumer insights while doing that research? Is like automation kind of helping, land on those results faster, or yeah, just like how is that process sort of changing as tech advances?
Yeah, I think there's much more points right now that we can use AI to help us sort of amplify the research a bit. But we still go by the typical way of making sure that we're talking to a decent sample size of consumers and getting enough info from them that would really validate the research that we're doing. We just amplify it more with some AI tools that help us maybe create personas that mimic those that that the sample size of the folks that we've researched. But at the end of the day, we kind of still go back to the core of consumer research, which is talking to the actual consumer themselves.
Yeah. So a lot of this process is still going to rely on kind of that pretty hands-on work. To assist in that, are there any like particular AI tools you guys are actually getting a lot of value out of these days?
We use internally Claude a lot and ChatGPT as well, depending on what you're using it for. So if we're talking about creative enhancements, the process before production, we don't use AI for any of our actual production. We still very much believe in the human touch. But some of the work that we do before it goes into production, we use Claude, we use Chat. We also use a few testing systems for our ads themselves. And then prior to putting them into the testing system, for example, before we go into production with a campaign, we'll have AI create sort of a storyboard for us, and we'll run that storyboard through a testing system, like a System 1, for example, that tells us whether or not that ad is going to resonate with consumers.
Can you talk a little bit about like how brands can kind of walk this line, right? Where they can sort of kind of lightly tease at some consumer behavior, but maybe not come across as like overly like judgmental or critical or harsh or mean. Because I think a lot of brands sort of like regardless of what category they're in, there is consumer behavior in all categories that is probably you could make fun of to a certain degree if you wanted to as a brand. Yeah, how can brands kind of like walk that line if this is something that they want to do, maybe acknowledge some consumer behavior and maybe kind of poke fun at a campaign? Like what is kind of the approach?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and we have lots of conversations when we go through this creative process with Rethink as well, is we don't punch down. So we have to make sure that the insight is there, obviously, the data backs it up, and then the creative idea just kind of, it's almost like we're in on the joke with you. We're laughing together, but it's not we're laughing at you, right? We're not punching down at a mom who's trying to plan a trip for her family, or we're not punching down at that millennial and making him feel dumb. We're here with you. We understand it. We're laughing with you, and we're like we're gonna solve your problem together, but not making you feel like we're making fun of you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's something that I was thinking about because I remember not too long ago, I feel like there was some like social conversation going around about like brands being too mean on social media to consumers, kind of like overdoing it a little bit as they are trying to like be funny and stand out, especially on social. So yeah, it does seem like there is sort of like a as a brand, there's a line you want to walk and you do want to be careful that you are not
Yeah.
like overdoing it because we've seen some brands do it, I think.
Yeah, and we pressure test it, right? So we'll go through the process, we'll come up with a creative ideation, and then we'll do some research, we'll talk to some folks, we'll get some focus groups in place, and really, really pressure test that we're not walking that fine line where it feels like, again, we're punching down on a consumer. That's the last thing we want to do.
Totally, totally. I also want to talk a little bit about the interactive nature of book boards. Part of the campaign is encouraging people to put their kind of non-committal friends right on these billboards, both to kind of like highlight the behavior and hopefully get that behavior to change. I imagine this is a campaign that I could have seen easily work also if you guys kind of just like made up mocks, fake group chats, fake names, and the campaign and the creative still kind of works. Can you talk a little bit about the reasoning behind like making this campaign interactive? What you guys were hoping to get out of that, and again, like if there was like a sort of a business challenge or a strategic challenge you guys were trying to address by making this campaign interactive.
Yeah, we really wanted this campaign to sort of help us punch above our media weight, right? We don't want to rely 100% on paid media to try to get us the results that we're chasing for the end of the year. So we want to do something that really gets folks or consumers to participate. And to do that, you have to give them something they can't really get anywhere else, something that's genuinely fun enough to share. And with book boards, we kind of let people publicly call out the friend who's holding up the group trip by putting them on an actual digital billboard in a city they're likely to see. So it's unexpected, it's funny, it taps into a situation almost everyone has experienced. And I think the best participation campaigns, they don't feel like marketing. And so that's the number one thing, right? We wanted people to participate because we wanted it to punch above our media weight. And so it can't feel like marketing. They feel like something you do anyway because it's entertaining, right? I would put my friend on a giant billboard if I wanted them to book the trip, if I had the money to do that, right? We're doing it for them. So that's what makes people, I think, want to engage, want to share it with friends, and ultimately bring more people into the conversation around the brand related to group chats.
How did you guys develop the media plan to kind of like support this goal of making the campaign feel interactive? You talked about like wanting to target right particular cities and even the decision to use billboards. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you guys landed on a media plan that helps support this idea of making the campaign interactive?
Yeah, so I mean, the idea to put them on a billboard came from Rethink, which was an awesome idea and why we jumped into it. But the value of the media plan itself is not the billboards. Those are great. The value is going to be the sort of social sharing that we get, the viral aspect of it. We've contracted a few influencers whose main hook is they're with their friends or they go on trips with their friends, so they're helping evangelize this message as well. And then we also made a targeted investment in the talent that made sense for the campaign. So as you see Grace and Julia, which are part of the video that we created. But what mattered more than the actual spend or the media planning itself was finding someone who authentically fit the idea for us in the influencer side. So we were much more focused on the creative impact and the conversation it would generate than on potentially, building the best we could build.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Given the interactive component of the campaign, can you talk a little bit about like what metrics you guys are going to kind of keep an eye on to determine the success of it?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the biggest one is going to be how much earned media we can generate from this. how much social conversations and engagement we're getting from this. And then at the end of the day, how much people are talking about us, right? How much our brand awareness increases as a result of this campaign. Because as you know, in brand marketing, you can't just pinpoint one metric specifically. There's multiple ones that we look at. And for us, it's going to be a range of these 3 or 4 key KPIs.
I'm wondering if you can maybe give some advice to listeners here about like how to succeed in getting consumers to participate in a campaign. And I get there's various degrees of like participation that you can ask for, especially to the degree that you guys are asking for, right? Where it's sort of like helping fuel the actual and creative and ads that people are going to see at the end of the day. How can people maybe who are listening who are like interested in trying to either do something similar or get consumers to like participate in a pretty significant way? What are some maybe successful like strategies or tactics for doing that?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is giving consumers something that's valuable to them, whether that's a prize, right? If you're doing some sort of like contest-based activation, or something so different, so out of the box and so fun that they're like, okay, I need to jump into this and I need to participate in it. Like Bookboards is, right? It's something fun, it's something different. It's something that will bring you joy at the end of the day if you get selected or if your friend gets selected as the person that's going to be put on blast on a billboard. So I think it's you need to find that hook that's really going to be connect with the consumer in a way that you want to connect with them. And if you find that and you build a good strategy around it, meaning you get influencers to talk about it, you find the right sort of mix to get that message out, then you're going to be able to get a good decent amount of participation on what you're trying to build.
Got it. All right, Carolina, I think that is all we have time for today. Thank you again for joining us here on the Marketer's Brief.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon. Glad to be here.
That was Carolina Montenegro, Senior VP of Global Brand Marketing at Kayak. I'm Brandon Dorr, Creativity and Media Innovation Reporter at Ad Age. I'd like to thank our producer, Lauren Chiardio, and invite you to subscribe to the Marketer's Brief podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We promise to keep it brief.